Rain was coming down in sheets. Roman soldiers struggled through mud and narrow forest paths. Their armor was heavy, their shields slick with water. The marching column stretched for miles. Somewhere ahead, their guide waited, a Roman officer they trusted completely. Then it started. A horn blast echoed through the trees, and suddenly the forest came to life. Spears rained down from the woods, arrows tore through the marching column, warriors surged from behind hidden earth walls. The Romans tried to form ranks, but the forest wouldn't let them in. By the time the storm ended 3 days later, three Roman legions had vanished from history, and the man who led them there was one of their own. Tonight on Impolite History, we're talking about Arminius, the Roman officer who betrayed an empire.
Impolite history.
How are you doing, MC?
Another day, another 77 cents.
77 cents. Did you adjust for inflation?
I did. It's another
That's
impolite
not.
part of history that we all have to deal with.
Oh, man. It is very rude. It is very rude. Welcome back to Impolite History. As you've already heard, we're going to talk about Arminius tonight. I'm going to hand it over to MC to get us started on uh, why would we even want to talk about Arminius, MC?
Well, because Rome was an empire that lasted thousands of years. And that may sound like a lot. It was about 2,000 years, give or take. They did a lot. They did a lot, to say the least. They conquered a vast majority of the known world. We have a few verified accounts of Roman diplomats and Chinese diplomats interacting with each other. So just despite, the Silk Road itself being open and Rome receiving certain goods through India and through the Middle East from China, there were there was direct communication between these two great empires throughout history, at least at some point. Maybe not so direct, but they knew of each other. And Rome itself is a landmark. It's a monolith of mankind's achievement throughout history as far as organization and society and empirical values and expansionism, colonialism. Rome itself as a empire has left its mark upon the face of what it means to be a civilized society, even to this day. Even to this day, over 1,000 or almost 1,000 years after its zenith, Rome has far-reaching consequences from technology that we have failed and some technology that we have only just begun to replicate, such as Roman concrete, which lasts decades upon decades longer than modern-day concrete does. Um,
Yeah.
and Arminius was one of the only people, besides, with the exception of maybe Pyrrhus and Hannibal Barca, that made the Roman Empire shudder because of how brutally effective he was at leading populations long oppressed by the Roman Empire in a somewhat successful, at least, for a majority of his life, we would say, a somewhat successful rebellion against this titan of a nation.
And he was so effective that he knew how to fight the Romans because they taught him, right?
They did. He had his own cultural roots in Greater Germania at the time that definitely contributed to a lot of the successes that he would have. His connection with his people and his homeland and his own status as somewhat of a noble at the time, much like Vlad the Impaler in an earlier episode that we discussed. Um,
Mm.
that kind of home field advantage definitely contributed, but a big part of it was that Arminius himself was adopted by a Roman governor known as Varus. And
Mm.
Varus he was all right. I mean, he was definitely a an interesting individual in his own right, but through that connection through Varus that he had to the Roman Empire at large and to the inner workings of the legion, the trust that he built with legionnaires and with centurions and with guides and such, it really laid the groundwork for what would become one of the biggest military defeats in the history of the Roman Empire, at least in my opinion. I mean, it was an absolute slaughter. When you look at the numbers of Germanic casualties versus Roman casualties, I mean, it was a massive disparity. And Rome had already had a few battles like that, like with the aforementioned Hannibal Barca. But
Yeah.
Arminius was a barbarian. He was someone who didn't come from what the Romans would have viewed as a highly civilized society, such as Carthage or such as Epirus. He came from a tribe. He came from people who did not have the technological edge or advantage or even the economic power that comparable empires had at the time. And that's what made that defeat that much more severe to the Romans because they had already spent decades oppressing the Germanic people. And then along comes Arminius with this insider knowledge and with this absolute mastery over the inner workings of his fellow tribes and the inner workings of the Roman nobles and the Roman military. And it really led to this kind of uncertainty among the population back at Rome of maybe the barbarians aren't as uncivilized as we thought. Maybe they're a lot more, maybe this is an actual threat that we need to respect. And
Yeah.
Arminius's contributions to the Germanic rebellion against Roman oppression really set the standard for how far Rome would expand beyond Arminius's downfall and beyond the resubjugation of his people during his eventual defeat. After that, the Roman Empire never really recovered. Had Arminius not existed, Rome may have expanded even further. Rome may
Yeah.
have expanded its borders far beyond what historically we know them to be. But Arminius shattered the Roman belief of invulnerability to its core. He completely destroyed their belief that they couldn't be touched and that their legions were an unstoppable force. And this
Yeah.
unstoppable force just happened to meet an immovable object at the time that, in my opinion, eventually would lead to the downfall of the greater Western Roman Empire.
Yeah. That battle that we mentioned at the very beginning, that where he killed the three legions, the that was 15 to 20,000 Roman soldiers died during that battle, and it was so bad that the numbers of those three legions, like it was such an annihilation that Rome never used those numbers again to name their they would not rename another legion after any of those numbers because it
They
was
com-
that
they
bad.
completely retired it.
Yeah, yeah, those numbers that were never ever used again. Um, and I mean, you can't blame them. Um, I found a little like tidbit. Emperor Augustus was supposedly wandering around the palace shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions." It was it was brutal. Everything I looked up about Arminius, they were like, yeah, the Romans were like the picture of confidence, and then he came along and was like, checkmate.
He was definitely of his era, of his time, he was Rome's greatest enemy. He was a new Hannibal because Hannibal managed to scare the Roman public to its core because of his crossing of the mountains to Rome's northern border, bringing armies to Rome's front doorstep. But at the end of the day, Carthage had been defeated, and Hannibal was fighting a losing battle, and he couldn't replenish his forces. The people back in Carthage weren't willing to send more men. The other generals that they had fighting in that war at the time weren't as competent as Hannibal himself. So he had a lot going against him. As far as Arminius is concerned, for a vast majority until I would say Germanicus got involved, Rome had all of the cards in the deck stacked against them. They had it to the point where Rome was saying, these Germans, who are just northwest of us, who are technically on the same continent as us, can march down here and take Rome if they so desire. They've already decimated 3 legions. We have no earthly way of stopping them. And had Germanicus not been the brilliant and absolutely masterful tactician that he was, and the incredible leader that he was, Arminius may have decided that Rome needed to fall. And there may not have been a lot that Rome could have done to stop them, because Germania's biggest problem when Rome conquered them was that it was a collection of tribes that weren't unified. They all fought against each other. When the Romans showed up, there were tribes that sided with the Romans and said, hey, we'll do whatever you want as long as you help us get rid of our neighbors and let us take their lands. We can give you more tribute if you do that. There were definitely Germanic tribes that were siding with the Romans because the Romans were so superior in a lot of ways. But then Arminius comes along, and there are all these massive Germanic tribes that got together and said, you know what, fuck the Romans. Arminius is willing to lead us to victory against them. He knows how they work. And had Arminius taken better care of these tribes that put their faith in them, in my opinion, he would have won this war. He would have kicked Romans out of Germania for at least most of their history. Rome may have come back and tried to subjugate a few tribes here and there, those that didn't necessarily subscribe to Arminius's idea of unity and freedom, but those were far and few between at this point. Rome spent way too much time oppressing and denigrating the people of Germania instead of accepting them into the fold, and instead of protecting them the way that they promised that they would. And Germanicus played on that. He would go and devastate one of these tribes that Arminius had gotten to pledge their allegiance to him, and that would show the other tribes, maybe Arminius can't protect us.
Yeah. And Arminius actually talked Varus into marching into that forest, didn't he?
He did.
And he'd go to him and said there was a rebellion or something, so we got to go into this forest, and then it was just it was an ambush.
Arminius was, for all intents and purposes, and maybe beyond that, an adopted son of Varus. Varus viewed Arminius he viewed him like family. They had a very close bond, at least in Varus's eyes. Varus did what he could to make Arminius feel like a Roman. He didn't say, oh, well, you're a political prisoner because you were a Germanic noble, and I'm going to treat you
You're the noble hostage, right?
Yes, basically the same that Vlad the Third.
Vlad, yeah.
But instead of just saying, oh, well, we're going to keep you hostage until you can rule to our benefit, Varus treated him like a son. And Varus loved him. There are many reports, verified and unverified, that Arminius may have been in line to inherit a lot of Varus's holdings, even though that was kind of frowned upon by Roman law, because at the end of the day, Arminius was still a barbarian. He was still Germanic. He wasn't a naturally born Roman. But Arminius had such an affection for his adopted son that he wanted Arminius to serve the empire the same way he did. He wanted Arminius to carry his torch from father to son, which is what makes the betrayal that Arminius visited upon Varus that much more tragic and that much more impolite, because Varus had the
Yeah.
utmost implicit trust in this barbarian boy that he had raised, this barbarian boy that he had welcomed into his home and into his family. It's honestly sad in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. I mean, Rome was oppressing the Germanic people in very brutal and very unkind ways that to this day we would view as war crimes, which is a part
Yeah.
of what really pushed Arminius to rebel.
Yeah. I
But
saw that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but on an interpersonal level, Arminius's betrayal of Varus was very, in my opinion, very cold and calculated.
Yeah. The a lot of Roman soldiers in that battle just drowned in the swamps because of the armor. The armor was so heavy. Of course, Germanic warriors attacked from those hidden earthen walls, but survivors were ritualistically sacrificed on altars, and skulls were nailed to trees. So it's Arminius didn't just go and annihilate these Roman legions. He
He made an
it was
example of them.
psychological. It was psychological warfare. He turned that battlefield into a psychological message. Like it wasn't just, hey, we fought, y'all didn't win. It was like, hey, we fought and I beat you in the worst way possible. That like you add all that in with the betrayal and everything, like, yeah, I'm just Arminius must have hated them. Like they're that couldn't have been just, oh, I don't want them to oppress the Germanic people anymore, because he could have just fought the battles and got the Germanic people out of what they were in, just fighting. He didn't have to go. He didn't have to take it to this level. You know, I mean, he took it to a whole other level. Like
Yeah.
he made sure the fuck you stung. It wasn't just a passing, like, I mean, he made sure it stung.
Well,
Um,
there are arguments for both sides when it comes to what happened during the massacre of the Teutoburg Forest. So Arminius was leading a confederation of Germanic tribes that had been oppressed by, or were in danger of being oppressed by, the Roman Empire for decades at this point. Some for centuries. And a lot of these tribes had experienced very severe and inhuman treatment at the hands of Roman legions for for generations. Some of them had
yeah,
seen their family, some of them had seen their women, whether it was a sister, a wife, a daughter, a mother. Some of them had been seen assaulted by Roman legions. They had seen their fathers, their brothers, their sons crucified, brutally beaten and executed.
yeah. I
So
wasn't thinking about it. Yeah,
there was a lot of anger and there was a lot of resentment among the Confederation. And the thing was is that just because it's a confederation does not mean that these tribes don't maintain their own sense of individuality, which is another thing that played against Arminius in the end, was that a lot of these tribes may have said, all right, well, we'll fight alongside the Havarti, but we aren't going to act like the Havarti. We are
hmm,
still who we are, and we still have our own grievances against the Roman Empire that need to be settled. And while Arminius may have had some hand in the brutal treatment of any Romans that they took prisoner or any Romans that they met on the field of battle, at the end of the day, I truly believe that a lot of what happened to the Roman legionnaires was less Arminius's fault and more just an ungodly amount of resentment that had built up in these Germanic tribes that they finally had a chance to visit back upon their oppressors.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
true.
Varus himself was beheaded and his head was put on a stake, and then I believe later on delivered to Rome. And I don't know if Arminius would have, in his heart of hearts, would have been okay with that, because Varus had treated him very well. And Varus,
Yeah,
to his own detriment, had treated many of the quote unquote barbarians very harshly. But at the same time, he had a barbarian son. He may have decided to be lenient towards the barbarians in a lot of cases. I mean, we don't know, because there's not a lot of surviving records and a lot of stories that we have that we can verify or trust
yeah,
from that time. But at the end of the day, it was a very unfortunate series of events. It had to happen. The Germanic people had to free themselves from the yoke of Roman oppression. The
yeah,
way they went about it, they wanted to visit the pain that they had suffered back upon their oppressors, and they wanted to set an example to the Romans to hopefully scare them from ever trying to march back into Germania.
right.
Which worked for a very short amount of time. There were a lot of Romans back home that were, especially those in the Senate, that were like, I mean, if we're going to lose 3 legions in a single battle,
Yeah,
maybe we don't need to be there.
yeah,
There were a lot of Romans that had grown up on stories of Hannibal's excursions into Italy and into the greater Roman Empire that were like, if this is going to be another Hannibal, maybe we should not get involved in this, because we still have the Sassanid Empire to the east to deal with.
yeah.
And I think Arminius's campaign may have contributed. If I had to put my money on it, Arminius's campaign into Germania and against the Romans contributed to the larger fall of the Western Roman Empire later, when the Visigoths and when the Sassanid Empire really started kicking the door down and beating the absolute shit out of Roman legions later on in history.
Yeah,
It's just, the Roman Empire at the time was a monolith. It was one of the greatest, if not the greatest at the time, empires that mankind had ever seen. It expanded far beyond its own borders. It included countless nations that had been standing for centuries before its establishment, such as the Egyptian Empire or kingdom, whatever you want to call it at the time. Things of that nature.
yeah.
And the fact that these barbarians, who had not had the kind of aspirations that the Romans had, could effectively destroy their military contingents and sincerely impact their economic stability. It was honestly terrifying for the Roman public, and I can understand entirely.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Had at that point, had the Romans ever been up against anything like this before?
As far as I know, to my knowledge, only Carthage. Only Carthage
Yeah,
had only Carthage itself as a empire or as a nation had presented the kind of threat that Arminius and his Germanic Confederation had to the Roman Empire. I mean, it was
yeah. But
existential.
they didn't consider them barbarians though
No, they were
in
civilized.
Carthage. Yeah.
I
So
mean,
it might have even been a little bit worse because these were supposed to be barbarians.
Exactly. I mean,
Uncivilized. They can't fight. And that all probably would have been true if they hadn't, Arminius hadn't been um, taken under Varus's wing the way he had, and Varus hadn't made sure that he was trained, um, to the best of the Roman ability. And that's what's so interesting, because Arminius fought to the best of the Roman ability. I mean, yeah, I don't know what else to say. He fought to the best of Roman ability, and he knew how they would fight, and he knew how to set it up. He knew how to set them up, and he knew that the first strike had to be a really good one, because they'd never trust him again. He'd never get another opportunity like this, so he had to make the first one count.
and he did.
Yeah, he absolutely did. And he wasn't. I've seen one of the things that popped up was like, that Arminius wasn't a national hero. He was a Roman officer who turned traitor.
Oh yeah. So Arminius himself, he wasn't very well known in Rome at the time. He was still,
Mhm.
in the grand scheme of things, Varus was, I would say, around a low to mid-level Roman noble, quote unquote. He wasn't really part of the ruling class or the Senate that would have had a lot of gravitas and a lot of, notoriety. His name wouldn't have been very well known beyond the borders of the provinces that Varus himself governed. I mean, in his local area, Arminius was definitely well known. But
Yeah,
in Rome, they would have been like, okay, you're Arminius of who's it, who cares? Like
yeah,
you're not a governor of Hispania, you're not a noble of Rome, you're not a noble of Africa or Egypt, so why should we care?
yeah,
You're a barbarian from the barbaric lands of Germania, you don't matter to us. And then Arminius comes along and leads the Germanic people in the successful ambush of the massacre of the Teutoburg Forest, and in which case, then you have a bunch of Romans going, so wait, this no-name barbarian who was raised by a Roman governor in a province to our north, far away from us, defeated 3 legions like it was nothing?
yeah. 3 legions in 3 days. And that's pretty much knocking them out like they were nothing. I mean,
And Arminius's campaign would set a precedent for Germanic resistance beyond that point. Because one of the other problems that Rome was really afraid of at the time was, even if they defeated Germanicus, he set the standard for how effective the Germanic peoples could be if they united against Rome. He set
mhm,
the precedent for what Germanic cooperation and what kind of threat that they could pose against the Empire of Rome. If he had only
yeah,
wiped out one legion and the others managed to escape, it may not have been that bad. But Arminius's the standard that he set would lead to rebellions such as Boudica during the 59 to 60 AD rebellion, the Celtic rebellion against the Roman people. Um,
mhm,
and even though these rebellions would lose, you're still losing thousands upon thousands of Roman soldiers that you can't replenish in a quick amount of time, because this is early history as far as the modern era goes. I don't know if I would
yeah,
consider it modern, classical era maybe.
yeah,
Um, this is still early history of the classical era. You cannot replenish those numbers in any meaningful way unless there is an existential threat to the nation. If it's just a people or a nation that wants to be free from the Roman Republic, the Senate and the emperor may decide that it's not worth the trouble. It's not worth taking men away who could be harvesting grain that we can save in case of a famine, or it's not worth taking men away who could be part of our maritime trade. It's not worth taking men away who could be our blacksmith or our guards or people who could defend our homeland if a greater threat, such as the Sassanid Empire, decides to march on our doorstep. Arminius set the precedent for it. Arminius, in my opinion, led to the downfall of the Western Roman Empire because they realized that, hey, we may have expanded too much. We may
Yeah.
have expanded to the point where our own legions and our own auxiliaries that we can draw upon places that are loyal to us still might not be willing to go off to a far off land and die so that we can maintain some kind of semblance of control over a people that they've never met and in their lifetime they likely never will meet.
Yeah. Yeah. It would have been a hard sell. I mean, even those most loyal and allied with Rome would have that would have been a hard sell.
I think besides the Roman Empire itself, Hispania, which is Spain, and probably the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt may have decided that they wanted to stay loyal to Rome long enough to try to see those provinces come to heel, just because their economic success was tied in largely to Rome's economic success.
Yeah.
And even those provinces like Hispania, if they decided to also rebel and remove themselves from the yoke of Roman oppression, they could turn to Africa for economic success. They could turn to the Germanic people for economic success, or the Franks, or the Celts of the United Kingdom. The Egyptians could have turned to Africa and Asia Minor. Rome got to a point where it expanded so far it could not control all of the provinces that it expanded to, because they didn't have the soldier count to support that in their homeland. And even if they did have the soldier count to control it, it just, when it comes to the cost of human life and to the cost of military economics, why would you?
Yeah. There was something that I saw that came up a couple of times that it's I guess it's a myth that Arminius saved Germany during this time, that he saved Germany. But Germany didn't actually exist back then. But
Yeah,
that's one of the myths. When I was looking up, like, the impolite truths about Arminius, I kept seeing, oh, Arminius saved Germany, and I was like, was there Germany? And it, like, no, Germany did not exist. The tribes fought each other constantly. They had no national identity, and they often allied with Rome, like you said earlier. And even Arminius fought other Germanic tribes.
So, in a way, I would agree with that statement. Just because people that had tried before Arminius, such as Vercingetorix during Julius Caesar's time, had tried uniting the Germanic people against their Roman oppressors. I mean, there were Germanic people further north and further east that didn't really experience a lot of Roman oppression because they were far enough away that Rome was still trying to solidify their grasp over the tribes they had conquered. But Arminius showed the tribes that they could unite. that they could fight as one people, even if they had
Yeah.
vastly different cultures, even if they had different hierarchies and societal structures. Arminius showed them that, hey, when the ball drops, we can fight as one. When our back's up against the wall, we can show the Romans that we can be a united nation. And Germania was far larger than Rome ever was, like just land mass and population wise.
Yeah.
Arminius's
Actually,
unification. What's up?
I was just gonna say, I guess that's true. Like he he only got a few tribes to unite long enough to ambush the Romans. But after that ambush, they knew they could do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. I mean, he he might not have directly united them, like went out and got them and made them all come together, but after that ambush, they knew they could.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing, is that up until Arminius's time, even during the time of Vercingetorix, there were Germanic tribes that said, "Oh, we could never work with the Helvardi,
Mm,
or we could never work with these people. We could never work with these people because we're too different. Our cultures clash too much." And Arminius was the kind of leader that said, "Okay, fuck your culture, fuck the differences that you have. Rome is going to make slaves of us all."
right.
And that kind of that kind of unification was something that the Germanic people had not experienced yet. And after they experienced it with Arminius, unless Rome carried out a genocide on the scale that mankind has never seen before, and to this day has never seen before. I mean, we're talking about a genocide that would make the Holocaust look like a Sunday drive to church.
Yeah.
Unless Rome carried out such a genocide that anybody could remember, or anybody had any idea beyond folklore and myth that the Germanic people could be united, Arminius really set a standard for what the Germanic people could achieve if they just put their differences aside and fought against the greater enemies that they had been revealed to by the Roman Empire. Because the Germanic people knew that there was a world beyond the Roman Empire. I mean, the Roman Empire was their most preeminent threat. That was the Roman Empire was the one that was subjugating them and oppressing them on a day-to-day basis. But they knew that there were other empires out there who might be able to do the same thing,
Yeah.
and that their survival ultimately hinged upon them being able to set aside their tribal and cultural differences and say, we're not part of this tribe, we're not part of this tribe, we are Germania, we are
Yeah.
Germans.
Yeah. I So let me ask you this. It's kind of getting into his death and what happened to him. Do you think if he had not tried to become the Germanic king, or like become their king, the king of the tribes, do you think do you think how do I phrase this? Do you think if he wouldn't have tried to become a king, that he would have kind of had a higher leadership role with them?
So, no. And part of that is due to the fact that there's a lot of historical evidence that indicates that Arminius had no interest in being a king. He had no interest in being the ruler of all Germanic people. He wanted
Hmm.
to free the Germanic nobles and the Germanic tribes from from Roman oppression.
Hmm.
And a lot of chieftains viewed that itself as a direct threat to their power. because Arminius was the one that was leading them to success against Roman invasions. And so anytime Arminius lost a battle, or any times he didn't win on the most certain terms, such as when Germanicus got involved in the war and showed that he was an equal commander to Arminius, there were a lot of chieftains and a lot of tribal leaders within Germania that were saying, "Look, you see, Arminius isn't the guy he makes himself out to be. Arminius isn't the guy that you think he is. He just wants to be ruler. He just wants to be the new emperor. He wants to be the one that oppresses us instead of Romans." And
Okay. So
it
so
was
then that was a rumor. Then you think Arminius didn't try to become king? Because I saw a lot of stuff that he tried to become the king.
in my opinion, in my opinion, not saying it's historical fact or anything of the sort, because again, we weren't there. We'll never know.
Yeah.
But strategically and tactically and just societally, it makes sense that Arminius would not want to be a king of all Germanic tribes. Because again, even at this time, even with them united fighting against the Roman Empire, you still have these tribes that are so vastly culturally different. You still have these tribes who consider themselves members of their tribe and nothing else. They just live in the land of Germania. They're not Germanic, they are
Right.
of their tribe. You cannot reasonably expect these tribes to say, "Oh, well, I mean, he's led us to a couple of victories, so why shouldn't we make him king?" I think what Arminius wanted was for the Germanic nobility and the chieftains to put their utmost trust in them or in him to lead them to victory.
Yeah.
And what that equated to in their minds and in the minds of Roman historians was he wanted to be the king of Germania, which maybe a little in practice until the end of the war, just because they all had to listen to him and they all had to follow his lead in the war. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't have been sustainable. They're just, they're too different.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about, even if you wanted, the thing is that the Roman Empire existed for, even the Western Roman Empire existed for a few centuries after Arminius's time. You're talking about a people that took centuries to decide that they wanted to unite. This wouldn't have
Yeah.
happened overnight. And Arminius, being as educated and as intelligent and brilliant as he was, probably would have seen that that wasn't feasible. I mean, it doesn't take the smartest person on the planet to see that these people may unite against a common enemy, but at the end of the day, they probably fucking hate each other for now. I mean,
Hmm.
just because you hate the Romans more than you hate your neighbors doesn't mean you stop hating your neighbors. It just means
Right.
you're not going to hate them as much as you normally do. And
Yeah.
the thing is that unless Arminius was planning on invading Rome and completely wiping out the Roman Empire, which he wouldn't have been able to do, even with a completely united Germanic people, he wouldn't have been able to do that.
Hmm.
He wouldn't have been able to become king either, because the Germanic people, again, were so different and there were so many petty kingdoms and tribes that were so culturally and societally different from each other that such a thought would have been laughable at the time. Like, Arminius probably would have been comfortable ruling over whatever tribes wanted him to rule. But at the end of the day, it's my opinion that he just wanted to lead his people to freedom from the Romans,
Yeah.
to a lasting freedom of Roman oppression, to where they could focus on their own shit and do their own thing. And maybe he rules his tribe where he came from. Maybe other tribes that want him to rule allow him to rule. But at the end of the day, no, I don't. I don't honestly believe that Arminius had any kind of plans or any kind of vision to be a king of all Germania. I think that was probably propaganda spread by the Romans in order to get the nobles to do what they did, which was murder Arminius themselves so that the Romans wouldn't have to do it themselves. Because once they lost
Yeah.
Arminius, they lost the war. I mean,
Yeah.
if you can turn a leader's soldiers and people and generals against him, they will lose the war. Because anytime a war starts and they have a really, really strong leader, and you turn the soldiers or their nation against them, that war is then lost, because they're not going to have another leader that can do it the same way that leader did.
How did they kill him? How did they kill Arminius?
It's highly debated. There's a
Okay.
lot of scholars and a lot of historians that believe that he was led to a meeting of tribal chieftains and such, and he was beheaded at this meeting, and his head was presented as a gift to Germanicus. To which there are also historians that believe that Germanicus himself had those leaders killed, because Arminius was Germanicus's. So throughout Roman history, whenever you have a great war like this that kind of presents a somewhat existential threat to the Roman Empire itself, you have one military leader on the Roman side who is absolutely incredible, and you have one military leader on the opposing side who is absolutely incredible. And these two are kind of like each other's foils. They're each other's arch nemesis. They have a huge amount of respect for each other, and they have the almost utmost adoration for each other, because there was a lot of honor in warfare at this time. For Hannibal's time, it was Scipio Africanus. That was Hannibal's arch nemesis, because Scipio Africanus was Rome's savior from Hannibal's campaign. And then during Julius Caesar's time, it was Pompey Magnus. When Julius Caesar found out that the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt had Pompey executed, and they delivered him his head, he screamed at them, because Julius wanted to defeat Pompey himself.
Yeah.
He needed the people of Rome to know that he was better. In the same way, the people of Rome needed to know that Scipio Africanus was better than Hannibal. In the same way, the people of Rome need to know that Germanicus is better than Arminius. So
Yeah.
there are historians that say that when the Germanic nobles presented Arminius's head to him, he had them executed,
Yeah.
because it was dishonorable.
Yeah. And that
Oh,
makes a lot of sense, honestly. It really makes a lot of sense. Especially back then, because your honor was everything, and it was cheating. You know, I didn't really beat him. Y'all ambushed him and killed him, and now we'll never know. Never know if I would have beat him or not.
and I think Germanicus knew that there would be rumors up until the modern day, because we will never know. Germanicus knew that there
Yeah.
would be rumors that he got the chieftains to do it, and that makes him look like a coward
Right.
that would not want to
Right.
face Arminius on the field of battle.
Yeah. And I'm sure there were, and there might be people to this day that think, oh no, he had a hand in it. Um, I don't think so. I think you're absolutely right on, that he wanted to best him himself. He wanted to face him on the battlefield. He didn't want the easy way out, so to speak. But do you have anything for final thoughts? This has been a really good episode. I didn't know a whole lot about Arminius. I've learned a lot, and it's an interesting and impolite story. His history is very impolite.
It certainly is. I mean, Arminius didn't do nearly as much brutal deterrent as Vlad III did. I mean, the Teutoburg Forest massacre had Roman soldiers that were tortured, ritualistically murdered, their skulls, staked to trees.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, he was still somebody who was fighting for the freedom of his people. And he
Yeah,
didn't have nearly as much unity and control as Vlad III did. So we don't know how
yeah.
much of the brutality that was visited upon the Romans was simply due to just the Germanic people letting their frustrations out, so to speak.
That's true. That might not have all been Arminius telling them, "Hey, we're going to do all this." That could have been the Germanic people saying, "This is what we're doing next." And Arminius wouldn't have been able to stop them if they decided this is what we're doing. He couldn't have stopped them. They would have turned on him back then.
If Arminius had been able to protect, because there were, I believe, 2 or 3 tribes that were some of his biggest supporters that Germanicus led campaigns against and razed their homelands and massacred their people, their wives, their children. That if Arminius had been able to protect, if Arminius had been able to prevent that from happening, they may not have had the chieftains may not have had the political justification back home with their own tribes to murder Arminius as they did when they did it. Because Arminius letting those tribes be massacred and more or less just, standing by while it happened, while he was on campaign against Germanicus, that more or less gave them the justification they needed to to slaughter their own leader, the only man at the time who had the inner workings and the know-how to defeat Roman legions, which ultimately led
Yeah,
to the defeat of the Greater Rebellion. Because after Arminius, I mean, Rome steamrolled them because
yeah,
they no longer had that strategic genius that they needed, that they had in Arminius. Um, it was a case of, I believe, of hubris and of arrogance winning the day, and the Germanic people snatching defeat from the jaws of victory in a very impolite way.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me again, MC. And thank all of you guys out there for joining us and listening to us talk about Arminius. And please let us know your thoughts. What do you think about Arminius? Do you believe he wanted to be a king? Do you believe, like MC said, that was probably just propaganda and rumor? Um, let us know. And don't forget, like, share, subscribe, and we will be back with more Impolite History real soon.
Alrighty.